Jorge Luis Borges, the distinguished writer who I am told comes from two countries, Argentina and also the Universopolis imagined by Vasconcelos. I also want to welcome you, the audience, who share this privilege with me. There has been magic in the air in the Spanish and Portuguese department these last 2 months, for everyone has written on his calendar, Borges is coming. April 9th, 4:30. And the telephone has been ringing every day. One of you in the audience called from Indiana, and you are now here with 2 Spanish teachers and several students from Valparaiso High School. 2 of you called from Hamlin College and St. John's College in Minnesota and flew in this morning to be here with Jorge Luis Borges. The University School of Milwaukee is here with its teachers and a veritable platoon of students and even some parents. So you can see there's no generation gap when it comes to Jorge Luis Borges. Marquette University is here. The University of Wisconsin-Green Bay is here. The high school teachers from Milwaukee County and all the surrounding counties are here. Carroll College is here. The Círculo Hispánico is here. Our own English department is here. Our philosophy department and classics department. Faculty and students are here. The man in the street is here, and with good reason, for the word has spread, Borges is coming. The magic of this gentleman standing here has brought us all together. Everyone has his own attitude towards Jorge Luis Borges, and I should like to give you my own. There is talk of labyrinthine ways of documents and books that don't exist, of a certain gentle irony towards reality. I should simply say that when I think of Borges, I think of a man on a horse and a peasant on a burro riding across a plain called La Pampa. It has been said that in creating the modern novel, Cervantes placed it in the middle between history and poetry. History is what happened, and poetry is what might have happened. And Don Quixote attacks his sheep and faces up to his fulling hammers between the two. It happened, yes, to Don Quixote, but Cervantes' great poetical imagination is there, imposing a certain order on everything. Similarly, the works of Jorge Luis Borges are both historical and poetical, with an unmistakable, gentle irony. May I invite you all to read Borges' tale, El Otro, The Other, which appears in a recent book, El Libro de Arena. It is February of 1969, and a man called Jorge Luis Borges is seated at one end of a bench to the north of Boston, in a place called Cambridge, overlooking the Charles River. He is watching the chunks of ice floating in the gray water when another younger man, somewhat on the better side of 20, approaches and sits at the other end of the bench. He too is called Jorge Luis Borges, El Otro, The Other. They begin to talk to each other, winter addressing springtime, so to speak. Borges, 70, prophesies many things for Borges, 20, but the latter will not listen to him, or rather he tries to listen, but he does not comprehend. Are they dreaming? Are they the same person? Are they distinct? It is hard to say, for they seem to be made of the same stuff, and yet their vision is different. This conversation of the young man with the old is, in my estimation, Jorge Luis Borges' helmet of Mambrino. Perhaps it is just to say that the corpus of Borges' work is one large helmet of Mambrino, an army of sheep, the sound of fulling hammers, or if you will, a windmill. Now, one of our students, Mr. Jaime Yanez from Mexico, has written a poem welcoming our distinguished guest to UWM. I shall ask him to read his verses, and then I shall introduce Mr. Borges to you. But first, Jaime Yanez.
Most thankful. Most thankful. There are no words. There are no words in the orange, I'm pretty sure. No.
Señor Borges, mis palabras son pocas y muy sencillas, pero ellas le expresan nuestro homenaje y le muestran la alegría que nos produce su visita. Dios, sé tú mi jardín y construye para mí un hermoso pensamiento para que pueda yo ofrecerlo como fresca flor al señor Borges. Les hablaré del hombre que entre nosotros hace presencia, de quien su ausencia tiene contristado un pueblo. Allende los mares viene de donde es gentil hombre, y en donde a orillas de un río fue como Moisés nacido. De las aguas del río de la Plata, Borges tomó su nombre, y éstas le transmitieron su sensibilidad de espíritu. Tan extraordinario hombre, solo desde país tan lejano, por su fe en nosotros vino, y es por esto de Argentina de los siervos el querido. Borges, ceñir tus sienes quisiera con el virtuoso laurel, mas quiero ofrecerte algo que vale más, el sentimiento de este pueblo. Dios te salve, peregrino, de tu hermoso pueblo argentino, mensaje de paz, sé bienvenido.
Muchísimas gracias.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is my privilege and my honor to introduce Mr. Jorge Luis Borges.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm about to talk of the writer, not of the average writer, there is no such person, of course, nor of the Platonic writer. He may exist in some Platonic heaven, and of course I share in him, as all other writers do, but of a certain writer who happened to be born in downtown Buenos Aires, I am told, in 1899. I know those things from hearsay. They may or may not be true. As a good solipsist, I suspect that those things never happened. But I go back to my memory. My memory also may be an invention, for all I know. But I go back to my earliest memory, and I think not of that large house in downtown Buenos Aires with the two patios, with a cistern, with the turtles inside the cistern, and the last patio that had once been the patio of the slaves, but I think of a certain library. I think of my father's library in a suburb to the north of Buenos Aires. We called it Palermo. I suppose the place hardly exists now. Things are so changed, but they exist in my memory, and memory, of course, is perhaps far more real than actual experience. This actual experience takes things for granted and goes on to other things, while memory loves to linger, while memory loves to stay. I think of that library. It seemed to me an endless library, a rambling library compounded mostly of English books. And this, I think, was a blessing to me. For though I was born to two languages, though I was born to Spanish and to English, the poetry and literature came to me through English. So that when I speak, let us say, of the 1,001 Nights, or as Captain Bertrand has it, of the book of 1,000 Nights and One Night, I'm really thinking of Bertrand's translation, or when I speak of the Bible, I'm speaking not of the Hebrew original. I have no Hebrew, but the King James Bible. And so also, poetry came to me through the English language and through the English music. I remember my father intoning verses of Swinburne, of Keats, of Shelley, of Fitzgerald, who in a sense invented the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, and those words taught me that language was not only, let us say, a means of communication, but could also be a music, a witchcraft, and a spell. And when I go over those verses today, my mother used to tell me, my mother who died in July last year, my mother used to tell me that I was intoning them with a very voice of my father. So although my father died in 1938, his voice still lives in me, and his love of English poetry. And when I say, for example, dreaming when dawn's left hand was in the sky, well, you're hearing now my father's voice, not my own. So that poetry came to me through English. And then also so many other gifts. Of course I knew that they were gifts. I was aware of that. And they were far finer gifts than the gifts I got, for example, on my birthdays and on Christmas. Since as a child, I always felt that I was unworthy of gifts. I always felt, what have I done to be given gifts? I have done nothing at all. Of course, I could not word that feeling because children are shy. Children are somehow mysterious through the shyness. So I could not say that. But to the other gifts, those were showered on me. And I suppose, since I feel grateful to them, I should name them now. For example, the Tales of the Grotesque and Arabesque by Edgar Allan Poe. And then later on, The Adventures of Arthur Gordon Pym, one of the finest books ever written, I should say. And in the last chapters, we get the strange concept of the white as being a nightmare color, of white as being nightmarish. And I suppose that when Herman Melville wrote his Moby Dick or the White Whale, he was thinking in terms of Edgar Allan Poe's Adventures of Arthur Gordon Pym. He thought that quite commonplace thing, white, might be made into a nightmare, even as we all tend to make of black or scarlet a nightmare. But he did a finer thing. He made of white a nightmare. Well, I read those stories, and then other nightmares came into my world. They were fine nightmares. I'm talking of the time machine, of the island of Dr. Moreau, of the country of the blind, of the first man in the moon, of the invisible man, and of other fine literary nightmares of H.G. Wells. Those had been written a few years before, and I was reading them in Buenos Aires. And I also read a writer who has been with me throughout my life. I'm talking of Rudyard Kipling. Kipling is judged by his political opinions. I suppose those opinions may have been wrong. I think of them as having been right. I think the British Empire made for good. But that is neither here nor there. I do not think a writer should be judged by his opinions. Since after all, opinions are on the surface, while writing comes from something deeper down. So I remember reading, as a boy, the Plain Tales from the Hills. I did not understand them quite well. But after all, what does it mean to understand a book? I don't think anyone who takes a book, who analyzes it, understands it. The only person who understands a book is the person who feels a book, the person who gets the feeling of the book, even if the only way to understand a woman is to be in love with her. Well, I remember reading those books and also other books that have been with me, seem to have been with me all the time. Robert Louis Stevenson, that fine Scottish writer. I came to him through the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And I have seen films made on that book afterwards, film scripts. And I think a mistake is always committed. The mistake of having the same actor to stand for Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Since you see a man becoming, since you see Dr. Jekyll becoming Mr. Hyde, you know all about him. While the readers of the book had the two characters. The two characters, you remember, were different. You remember that Dr. Hyde was a stout, portly, tallish man, while the other was darker, shorter, and there was something that seemed to be wrong about it, so you couldn't lay your finger on it. And then in the end, and then he was younger, and then in the end you find that those two characters are the same, so they blend into the same man. Now that is carefully avoided by film people who are the same actor playing the two roles. But that kind of thing that kind of mistake is being committed over and over again. I've seen 3 films on Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I've seen that mistake going on. Then there was another book I read. I remember the book of one of the few Spanish books we had. My father had in his library. And that book was Don Quixote. We've been hearing about Don Quixote. I remember that that edition. I remember the steel engravings. And at first, I was rather put out, let's say, I was rather worried over the language. The language seemed to me unnatural. The Spanish was not the kind of Spanish I heard, but somehow the story of Alonso Quijano, who dreamt, who did his best to dream himself into Don Quixote, and who eventually became Don Quixote, and who in the last chapter finds out that he's not Don Quixote but Alonso Quijano, that story has been with me throughout my life. I think it's one of the finest stories in the world. For people who are not read it, and I suppose there are unhappy people, or rather happy people since they have that happiness in store, I would tell them to begin by the second part. The first part is not much account. Cervantes himself was very shaky about it. He had to work in romantic tales. He thought it might bore the readers otherwise. But the second part is a very fine, it's really one of the greatest novels of the world. And there we find many strange facts. For example, the characters in the second part of Don Quixote have read Don Quixote. They know all about the book. All this, of course, was followed later on by Pirandello, but I think Cervantes did it in a finer way and in a more subtle kind of way. Well, I seem to have been reading that book all the time, and there were other books I read. Why should I not speak of the first book I read on Buddhism, The Light of Asia, by Sir Edwin Arnold? And why not remember those, perhaps not too fine verses I read, but somehow stick in my mind after I have read them? That must have been in 1908 or 1910. I was a boy then. But boys are very sensible to reading. In fact, you might say that you only read when you're a boy or a young man. After that, you may discover a new poet. You may discover Robert Frost, for example, as I discovered him. But that discovery is not a major event in your life. You read it, you analyze it, you catalog it, you do with it, as Dr. Dryas just censured by T. Carlyle did, and then you go on to other things. While when you are a boy, or when you are a young man, then you're swept off your feet by beauty. You say, as the great Andalusian writer said, "Oh Lord, there is too much beauty in the world. Let there be no so much beauty." And I suppose if we were sensitive to things, we would feel of poetry not always belonging to certain things, let's say to Greek mythology, to a sunset, to lost love, to the hope of coming love. We should think of poetry as being with us all the time. And I suppose God thinks of the world in that way. Since the world is being begotten every morning and it goes on and on, it seems to us as if God were interested in this drab world of ours, and we should be interested also. Since after all, nothing exists except the present, because our memories are a part of the present. Our hopes and fears concerning the future are also part of the present. Well, I have been telling about those first books. I should also speak of Sarmiento's Facundo, of the history of the Argentine Republic, as written by Vicente Fidel Lopez, and also of certain things to be found in my house, those things that I looked at reverently. For example, horses of my forefathers, sabers and lances that had fought against the Spaniards and against the Indians in the Battle of Junín on the western frontier. Those things were also part of my life, since somehow I had my share in them. And then I go on to 1914. And in 1914 we went to a city I greatly love, Geneva. I have the happiness to possess many hometowns. Why not mention Buenos Aires? Why not mention Montevideo? Why not mention Geneva? Why not mention Edinburgh? Why not mention Austin in Texas? Why not mention Boston also? Well, and other cities. I don't want to go on because, of course, I know that in an enumeration, what is really remarked are the omissions. So let those cities stand for the other loved unnamed cities. They also included. They also included, though why shall I name them since I'm not an atlas after all. Well, in Geneva, I was given two gifts. One gift was the French tongue, since I had to study everything in French. And with French, I do not think greatly of the French language, but I think greatly of French literature. And with French, there came to me, let us say, Racine, Corneille, Voltaire, Montesquieu, Diderot, D'Alembert, Hugo, and then afterwards, of course, Verlaine, the music of Verlaine. And that has been with me all the time. And of course, Flaubert. But this catalogue might be an endless one. And then I also, let's say, to dug up out of the past a language that is very mistakenly called the dead language, a language that we all feel wistful about. We're always regretting Latin. I had Latin. My Latin, as everybody's Latin, is rather rusty today. But still, I wrote quite bad Latin hexameters, and I read Seneca, I read Virgil, and even to have forgotten Virgil or Seneca or Horace is a possession. And after all, since my language is Spanish, I still have some kind of bastard Latin in me. I should be thankful also to Spanish. And then I had been reading Schopenhauer in English. And then I was greatly daring them. I said, well, I'll teach myself German in order to read Schopenhauer in the text. And then I did it in this way. I knew that German grammar is a weariness of the flesh. So I got me a copy of Heine's Buch der Lieder. I knew that poetry should make for brevity. And of course Heine makes for brevity and for beauty also. And I also bought a rather bulky German-English dictionary. So the languages I knew, the one that was akin to German was English, of course. Then I began to read Heine. And after 2 or 3 months, a wonderful thing happened. I felt that I could do without the dictionary. I was going on and I was reading the finest poetry in the world. I was reading, Das küsste mich auf Deutsch und sprach auf Deutsch. Man glaubt es kaum, wie gut es klang das Wort, ich liebe dich. Es war ein Traum. Well, and then I was reading Google from Hofmannsthal also, and Demel, and the Lilienkron, und in die Schlacht sind wir hineingeritten. Well, all those things, it came to me, and I was really thankful for them. And I was also writing at the time. My father had always encouraged my writing. I asked him for advice, and then he said to me, read much, write much, tear up everything you've written, and above all, don't rush into print. And I followed his advice. We came back to Buenos Aires, that must have been in 1921 or so, and in 1923 I came to him with a manuscript book. And I said, I think that this book may be not wholly unworthy of print. I would like you to go over it. And then he said to me, he was a very wise man, he said to me, don't think anybody can help anybody else. You must make your own mistakes and find out when it's only too late. I know that this book is full of blunders. I don't have to read it in order to know that. But I won't help you. You publish your book, you go ahead, and you must fumble, you must grope, you must find, your own way. And I've been trying to do that ever since 1923, when I published my first book, Fervor de Buenos Aires, a book made of the discovery of my hometown, that long, straggling, shabby city of low, flat-roofed houses stretching out to the west and to the south, into the Pampa. All those things were given back to me. And also, I mean, there's so many fine friendships. Well, I published that book, and I've been going on and on. And I'm sorry to say that I have published 50 books. But that kind of thing can't be helped. Once you begin, you never know when to stop. Of course, well, if you're going to visit me in Buenos Aires, you'll find none of those books at home, since I never read what I've written. I prefer to think of myself as being a young man of 76, who wants to go on, and with no special use for wastefulness, except if the wastefulness be used for literary, or to use it. Well, I would like to say something about what I write. Suppose many people think of me as a poet. Some friends think that I'm an intruder, an outsider in poetry, that I'm really a short story writer. And before answering questions, I would like to speak about 2 or 3 of my stories that perhaps you may have read. One of the stories is called El Sair, the Sair. I clipped that word from Lane's Manners and Customs of the Modern Egyptians, one of the names of God. I don't know what it means. I don't know Arabic. But I got that word. The whole story came to me from a single word, inolvidable in Spanish, unforgettable in English. We're using that word all the time, and we never trouble to think about it. But once that quite common word struck me, and I said to myself, what if there were an unforgettable thing in the world? What if there really was something unforgettable? And the story came out of the adjective unforgettable, inolvidable in Spanish. Then I thought, well, if there were a forgettable unicorn, that would do many good, since unicorns are unforgettable. It must have something quite trivial. And then I thought of a coin, since a coin has thousands and thousands of sisters or brothers, you want it. And then I thought of a common 20-cent coin, a coin exactly like the other thousands and thousands of coins to be found. And then I said, well, what if that one coin were to be unforgettable? What if there was something, let us say, something of witchcraft in the coin that made it unforgettable? And then I said I would write a story about an unforgettable coin. I had that, but I needed something more. Of course, if my hero, since I'm unable to create characters, I am always the character, the hero. What if I were given that coin, let's say, in a store or in a bookshop? That would do me no good. There must be something, emotion, to have come first. And then I remembered what Edgar Allan Poe had said, that there is nothing more poetic, nothing more apt to poetry than the death of a beautiful woman. And so I thought of having loved a woman, of having not been loved by her, and of that woman dying. And then perhaps I might think that since she was dead, I in a sense possessed her, since I had no rivals, since she only existed in my memory. So I created a beautiful woman, I made her die. You think they're very easy on paper, you can do it. And then I went to the wake. There are wakes in Buenos Aires still. And then I walked out of the wake in the small hours, because I had to give my hero, I had to give him distress, sorrow, kind of relief also in the fact that the woman who despised him and whom he loved had died. I had to give him all those mixed emotions in order that he should be fit for the coin. And then he goes to a neighboring store, he has a cup of brandy, and then when he's handed back the change, he finds that coin, alike to all other coins, and quite different, since that coin is unforgettable. he takes it into his hand. He looks at it. The moment he looks at it, he knows that his doom is sealed. He shall never forget the coin. He spends a sleepless night, tossing to and fro, thinking about the coin, not thinking as his duty was about the dead lady who had died. No, the coin has taken hold of him. Then he feels this way leads to madness. Then he attempts many things. He attempts, for example, he buys a sovereign. He buys an English, a British sovereign with St. George and the Dragon, and he says, if I try to think of this gold coin, well, this, of course, will shine brighter than my Trojan dime. But he can't. That coin is no good to him. And then he finally takes a subway. He goes to a southwestern suburb of Buenos Aires. There he loses the coin, but the memory of the coin is not lost. And in the end, he feels that he's going mad. And then he thinks to himself, after all, a moment will come when I shall no longer be Borges. I shall only be the coin. And who knows, since all things are a token and a symbol, behind the coin I may see God. Who knows? And that is the end of the story. Well, that is one of the stories I wrote. Then I wrote another story. Maybe you have read it. In any case, you'll forgive me for repeating it. Because after all, my justification lies in my stories. I cannot be justified by other things. I can justify it by my writing. And I think that my stories may be allowed at least to be read. Well, that story is called The Aleph. And that came to me, I'll tell you how it came to me. It came to me through a German book it's written by a German Lutheran theologian on God and on the attributes of God. And among those attributes, I found his eternity. Why should I use the word eternity, since a finer word was coined by Bishop Wilkins in the 18th century? The word everness, that is a very fine word. Well, among the attributes of God, I found the attribute of eternity. Now we ought to think of eternity as standing for the sum total of days. We think of eternity as, to quote Shakespeare, I should have quoted him before, all our yesterdays, and today, and all our tomorrows. The eternity is something far uncannier than that. Eternity stands for an eternal now. And in this eternal now, God is seeing, let's say, he's seeing the invasions of Hengist, of Horsa, he's seeing the Punic Wars, he sees the discovery of America by Eric the Red, he sees the other discovery by Columbus, he sees our wars of independence, he sees the 2 world wars, and also the things that are looming ahead, the things to come. He sees everything, and he sees them in one eternal moment, an eternal now. Then I thought to myself, after reading this page, felt dizzy after reading it, what if I take this idea of eternity and apply it to a less important category of time? What if of space? What if instead of time of course is the riddle, the chief riddle, what if I think of space? What if I think of all space as to be found within a certain point in space? And then I bethought myself of the James Joyce fancy of a map of England. Royce thought that a map of England might be drawn on the ground of England. In that map there will be point-to-point correspondence with all things in England. And among them, of course, the map. And in the map, the map, and in the map, the map, and in the map, the map, and so on, forever and ever. And I said, well, I will take that idea. I will imagine a circle. A circle seems to comprehend all things, seems to enclose all things. I will take a small luminous circle. It has to be luminous in order to be seen. And in that circle, I might find the whole of space, everything. let us say, the stars, the spaces between the stars, the oceans, the continents, the cities. It's ourselves, our bodies, the atoms, everything. And all those things will be found in one small disk. Now what do I do with that disk? It had to be placed in some totally place, because if not, the contents will be lost. So I thought of a certain rather dingy, shabby street in Buenos Aires called Calle Brasil. I knew the neighborhood quite well. And I thought, well, here in a basement, there might be an Aleph. I gave the thing the name Aleph. I took it from Cantor's book on the Mengelero on infinite numbers, and I said, here we might have an Aleph. That is to say, a circle enclosing all things and also enclosing itself, and so on to eternity. Then I also needed a preliminary story. I needed a man who was sadly shaken. I needed that man to see the Aleph. I thought out a fable more or less like the first one, and then I wrote the story. And there the man sees the Aleph. He sees all things to be found in the visible world. He sees them all at once. He's gifted. I mean, at that moment, he sees things as God sees them in space. And he also sees the Aleph, and he also sees that one thing that no man has ever seen, that perhaps no God has ever seen, the universe. And he's shaken to pieces. That is a revelation. Well, that's a story. I think it's a story about, well, suppose I may be able to mention it. Then I wrote another story called The Congress. The Congress is a story based on Carlyle's French Revolution. The idea of a Congress of mankind, of all men of mankind being represented in one Congress, and of a certain estanciero, or cattleman or ranchman in Uruguay, having the idea to found that Congress, wherein all mankind should be represented. Then, of course, he has to go to enormous troubles. He has to find representatives, let us say, of all the races of mankind, of all the offices, of all the categories of mankind. And also, since the passes are represented also, he needs a collection of books. And in the end he finds out that no single book can be left out, because every book stands for something and should find its place in the Congress. So that, and then you have to find a language for the Congress, and that language might be Esperanto or Volapük, whatever it might be. Then the thing goes on, and then there is a moment when the reader feels that the Congress is so vast that, of course, it can never be attained. And then in the end, you get the revelation. There is no need of the Congress, since the universe is already the Congress. And then the man burns all his books. He goes for a long walk through Buenos Aires with his friends. All this happens way back in 1899. He goes for a long walk. He sees all things. He thinks of the trees, of the people he runs across in the desert streets. All those are congressmen also. Then he feels thankfulness and gratitude, for, after all, his scheme has come to naught. But really, the universe stood in no need of a scheme, since the universe is the Congress. I think that is perhaps the best story ever written, though critics have not been too fond of it. And now, I suppose I should go on to speaking of a writer in general. Because after all, a writer's destiny, and I'm supposed to speak on that, a writer's destiny is one of the strangest destinies on earth. So of course, all fates are strange, especially to one who has to undergo them. Now, the destiny of a writer is not made primarily of words. A young man feels words. Indeed, I don't think anybody can be a writer who has no feeling for words. For example, when we read, "Until white England bring black Spain to shame," I suppose the sense is irrelevant. You may not think of England as being white or Spain as being black, but we feel, let us say, there is something higher in the words, we are carried away by the words. And then we have that mere rhyme of Spain and shame. Well, why analyze of things? Things explained are generally explained away. I do not care for literary analysis. I think we have to feel things. Or let us take another example. This one from that book I read in my father's library. That library I never seem to have strayed away from. Dreaming when dawn's left hand was in the sky. Now this was a gift made by Uriah Fitzgerald to the Persian original. You do not find those words in the text, as far as I know. You see, I suppose that the witchcraft, the magic, lies in the word left. Since had he written, dreaming when dawn's right hand was in the sky, that would avail him nothing. But dreaming when dawn's left hand was in the sky seems like a thing seen in a dream, seems something mysterious, really. Well, I could give you other examples of word magic. Of course, word magic is also thought magic, and it's also, let us say, the magic, the witchcraft of the music also, of the word music. Well, a writer should begin, I should say, by being sensible to words. By being sensitive to words. If you're not sensitive to words, then you cannot be a writer. But after a time, writer discovers that words should not be too obtrusive. That was a great mistake made, for example, well, by many fine writers. The fact that their words stand out, and then they go in for purple patches. Their words are too visible. While I suppose, in a page well written, the words should be invisible. What you should hear is what's happening, let's say, beyond the words. And that is what we found, I suppose, in novels chiefly. We all think of Cervantes, of Tolstoy, of Conrad, as being great novelists. And yet we may have no Spanish, no Russian, or no English, because we know that a great novel can survive anything, even the translations. And after that, then I suppose a writer should have but one tenet, and this is the one I have found. When a writer, if you want to write something real, you should be sincere, you should be true, not to mere circumstantial reality, that made for journalism. You should be true to your dream. Mr. Coleridge wrote that when you're witnessing a play, or when you're reading a book, you don't believe in them, but there is what he finally called a willing suspension of disbelief. Now, how can a reader get the willing suspension of disbelief? Only if he thinks that what the writer is writing may not be true, but that what the writing is true to his dream, to his vision. So that as long as I write things that belong to my dream, then I am being a writer. I will tell you now, after all, I'm supposed to reveal things, so I have no secrets really. I'll tell you now the way I set about writing a story. Firstly, I do not set about writing a story. I may be walking down the street, or up and down the National Library in Buenos Aires, or anywhere, then suddenly I glimpse a shape. We might, to use a convenient metaphor, we might talk of an island, a long island, like Whitman's Long Island. And then I glimpse the two ends of the island. And those may stand for the beginning and for the end of the story. So that when I write a story, I know the end of the story, and I know how the story should begin. But I have to discover what happens in between, and that is my task. And then, of course, I have to find the right setting for the story. I have to find out where the thing happened in the outlying slums of Buenos Aires at the turn of the century, or where it happened in the East, or where it happened in the States, or where it happened. And then, of course, is a minor task. Suppose I must look for the names of the characters. And then, after that, I merely have to find my way. I have to grope my way in the darkness of the story. Of course, I may take the wrong turning, I generally do. And then I have to retrace my steps and go back. But a moment comes when I see the whole thing, and then I am allowed to write it down. That, I suppose, is my way of writing stories, of writing short stories. I mean, to discover something. And of course, to invent in Latin means to discover. Mr. De Quincey pointed out that when people spoke of the invention of the cross by St. Helena, they did not think that St. Helena had forged the cross. They thought that she had discovered it. And the word to invent and to discover are the same. And this, of course, takes us back to Plato, who thought that all things already existed. The man who said, for example, that a statue is in the marble. You merely have to chip off what's irrelevant. Or that very fine poem of Tim Rout, the Southern Confederate laureate, who wrote that cemetery, that very poor cemetery for the Confederate dead after the war between the states. And then in the last line he says, the shaft is in the stone. There is saying nothing has been evolved, but things are there. Well, we have to discover things. And that is only done, let us say, by patience, or rather by letting the dream have its way with you. Once you have your story, then you have to write it down. And I should say, the less you add to it, the better. There was a time when I went in, let's say, for overwriting my stuff. I would go in for metaphors, I would go in for ornaments, but that thing is wrong. I think that if a certain story, or maybe if a certain conception interests me, it may interest other men who, after all, are not much unlike myself. So this is the advice I will give. But I go rambling on. I do not know what I have written is worth anything, but I know that my sole justification lies in writing. Besides, I have been blind or near blind for the last 15 years. And what else can I do but go on writing? Since writing, after all, is my justification. And also, it gives me a certain kind of quiet joy. I should be grateful for being a writer. And now I would like you to ask me questions and do my best to answer them. Thank you for your attention.
Questions here, please. If you have trouble making yourselves heard, there are microphones here at the aisle. If anybody has a question.
Ronald Deaf might help you with a question.
I'll
repeat them to me.
I'll repeat them to you.
I'm Ronald Deaf, no?
Okay, I'll repeat.
Thank you. Well, it went off quite well, no?
I beg your pardon?
It went off quite well, no? You see that? The horse of the wind.
If you have any questions, please, we'll entertain them. If you have trouble making yourself heard, will you use these microphones at the head of the aisle? Anybody care to ask a question? Okay.
Senor Borges, you told us that some friends of yours consider you a poet, others a short story writer. Would it be fair to say that all your work is poetic and you simply write in prose or in verse?
Or that's a very generous statement. I think there is no essential difference, except in questions of print, in matter of print, between a poem and a tale. And I may be allowed to recall that poetry, after all, began by the epic. As I say, poetry began by storytelling. You find, for example, the Iliad, the Odyssey, the Aeneid, then you find the Films of Fragments, the Beowulf, and so on, the Chanson de Roland, the Cantar de Miosside. that you say the poetry began by telling tales. So I wonder if there is an essential difference. When I am, let's say, creating, the word is far too ambitious, but when I am evolving something, I do not know whether what I am thinking of, what I am dreaming about, may turn into a tale or into a poem. And that is supposing quite irrelevant and circumstantial. I suppose you're right, sir. I think of myself as a poet, though none of my friends do. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Do I have to go to the microphone?
Well, I can repeat it if I can hear you.
In some anthologies of Latin American literature, your name appears along with Bioy Casares and Silvina Ocampo as writers of the so-called fantastic literature. Do you agree with that label, and what does it mean to be a writer of fantastic literature?
Silvina Ocampo and Bioy Casares are very dear friends of mine. And of course, we attempt literature of the fantastic. Of course, I suppose that, let's say, there were times when all literature was a literature of the fantastic, since men believed in ghosts, since men believed in omens. But today, as we are unbelievers, we think of reality being on one side and of unreality or the fantastic as being on the other. But that, I think, is a mistake, since I wonder whether a railway accident is more real than the dream I had this morning and forgot all about. I suppose all things are real or unreal. In fact, we may call reality the sum total of things. But when I speak of literature of the fantastic, then I think in terms, let's say, books like, well, for example, in The Invisible Man of Wells, we have an invisible man. In those stories I was telling you about, in the Zaire, we have an unforgettable thing. In the Aleph, a point of space, wherein may be found all the points of space. And then those things, of course, are unreal, I think. But really, what I don't suppose there is much difference. Suppose if you are writing literature, what you are writing is unreal if you compare it to the reality, or to what is called reality, the commonplace reality. And I suppose it's real since it is also included in the world. I wrote a poem called The Other Tiger. That poem, I think, is one of my good poems. I am thinking of a tiger. I seem to be always thinking of tigers, I don't know why. Something so fine about them. Well, you remember Blake's Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forest of the night, and of Chesterton, who called the tiger an emblem of awful elegance. Well, I am alone, I'm wandering walking to and fro in the library, and then I think of a tiger. Then I think of that tiger as being in the jungle, in Bengal or in Sumatra. Then I say, I will write a poem about that tiger. Then I describe him, give him metaphors, I give him tropes, I give him adjectives, and after I've written some 10 lines about him, then I think, but after all, what I have written is merely a verbal tiger. How does that affect the real tiger? Then I define the real tiger and say, the real tiger, not the one to be found in the preceding poem, was this one, and then I describe him. But the fact of describing him, he is also unreal. And then I go on looking for the third tiger, and I know that all tigers, all verbal tigers will be what verbal equations, and the real tiger will always be beyond my reach. And then the poem ends, because I know that the search is endless. I know that if I begin searching for the tiger, I'm merely going, let us say, to weave a chain of endless tigers, and I shall never find the other tiger, the tiger who is not in the poem. At the same time, that poem of mine that makes for the unreality of poetry makes for reality, since you may think there is a real tiger in Bengal. There is at this moment a real tiger, and there are many tigers in Bengal. At the same time, the tiger of my poem is also an object of the universe. My verbal tiger is as much a part of the universe as the fiery vertebrate tiger in India. So that the poem may be allowed to stand, let's say, as a justification of art. Since when we are writing, we may not be creating mirrors of the universe, or we may be creating things quite as real as mirrors, and quite as real as the rest of the universe.
Are there any other questions?
Earlier in your speech, you said that you seem to regret what happens after one leaves boyhood in reading literature. One loses a certain sense of discovery, and I believe you said that one then begins to analyze literature. Within the context of that comment, what do you feel are the limits of the critic and of literary criticism?
As a critic, I should say that critic is of no importance. I think that what is really important is the pleasure felt by the reader and by the writer also. Of course, we all remember Wordsworth, who thought that he had lost something magical. We remember that poem about intimation of immortality in early childhood, that when he said that a glory had been lost. At the same time, in old age, you may be allowed a quieter glory. You may be allowed a certain serene light. We may look at things in a quieter way. So, when I think of my lost boyhood, my memory of lost boyhood is quite as fine as the boyhood I have lost, and the things, and the plains, and the rivers, and the horses I have lost.
Are there any other questions?
Mr. Borges, it seems fairly obvious to those of us who are students of the field that you really opened the way for the whole new wave of magic realism in Latin American literature. You're the progenitor of that whole explosion. Do you have a sense of some of these authors, Garcia Marquez, Carlos Fuentes, and others, continuing your work?
I have read of these writers, I have only read Garcia Marquez. I think him a very fine writer, a far better writer than myself, of course. But I wonder if he was really helpful. They were written the same thing without me. And if I have helpful, well, it's all to good. But really, since I went blind for reading purposes in 1955, I have done but little contemporary reading. Because when I lost my eyesight in 1955, I felt this would not be the end of something, but the beginning of something else. And then I went in for the study of Old English, and now of Old Norse, and I have done little contemporary reading. I'm afraid contemporary writers may be much like myself, and then I'm not interested in them.
Are there any other questions?
If you would like to ask something, so.
I've asked questions.
Since I'm not allowed to ask anything, you might.
Well, you ask questions, perhaps.
No, I won't. I never ask questions, even in examinations.
You mentioned Plato as a philosopher. It seems to me that you admire. Are there other philosophers that you have been influential in your work?
Yes. I should say, besides Plato, I owe, well, an endless debt to Berkeley, to Hume, to Schopenhauer, I have named him, to Mautner, to Bradley, to Royce, well, to Bertrand Russell. I might go on. I think that those names are sufficient, especially the name of Berkeley. and of Descartes also. Those names are names that mean much to me. I should have named them really. But I named Plato, and I have spoken also of the Kabbalah, of the Gnostics. I've gone in for some out-of-the-way reading. Really, I'm not a real student of philosophy.
You mentioned philosophers. I wonder if Unamuno has any bearing on your writings, like the other you wrote. Is it a counter?
Well, I think of Unamuno as being a fine writer, but as to his interest in personal immortality, I cannot share it. When I die, I want to die wholly. I want to die body and soul. And Unamuno seems strangely interested in having Miguel de Unamuno going on and on. I don't know why.
I would like to ask you a question concerning time. This afternoon, when we were talking, you mentioned that it's the great enigma. I believe you said that.
Yes, the great
And if you
read
read Badian Khan, he calls it the stero Satan, advancing a kind of a Gnostic religion, I expect. Could you, this is a rather naive question in a sense, but could you perhaps boil down your attitude towards time before you spoke of eternity?
Yes. Yes, I think
Is
that
time something negative to you or
No.
evil? Or?
No, I don't think of it as evil. I think that time is the one essential thing. Since we might think in terms of a spaceless universe. Space, after all, only belongs to sight, to taste, to feeling. But what I think we might have, at least ideally, we might have a spaceless universe compounded of time. Let us say a universe compounded of mind, or of a single mind, of music and of words. And there were no need for space. While time cannot be thought away. Because if we think of time as having